Hello, and welcome to our webinar, Kidney Conversations, Voices of Transplant Recipients.
My name is Rachel, and I am the nurse that works with the Polycystic Kidney Disease Clinic at University of Maryland as the patient navigator. And part of my role is to help facilitate community-facing opportunities for our patient population to help community build, provide education opportunities, and just help with a sense of connection for those in the PKD community, just to recognize that you are not alone in your journey with PKD. Part of what we're hoping to provide with this panel is to discuss some of the hard realities that can come with polycystic kidney disease, which not every patient, but a lot of patients will end up in end-stage renal failure and end up needing a transplant, or have dialysis, depending on where you are with your journey. So this panel is specifically geared to discuss kidney transplants, and everybody on the panel, aside from myself, and we have a transplant coordinator, Christina, has had a kidney transplant. So I am going to have everybody introduce themselves. And after all the introductions are done, we are going to go through some preset questions that we, as the panel, kind of came up with, questions that they had or have been asked after their transplant and that we thought might be helpful for those tuning in. And then at the end of the preset questions, we will have time for live Q&A. So we're slotted to go until 8:30. If all the questions are ending before then, we can end early, but we will at least make sure we have plenty of time for live questions. So to start us off, I'm just going to I'll have Christina introduce herself first. She's our transplant coordinator.
Hi, my name is Christina. I am the nurse manager for the pre-kidney department, and I was a transplant coordinator prior to that.
Thank you, Christina. All right, Daryl.
Sorry about that. I had to find the mute button. My name is Daryl Miller. I am I shouldn't say but I am a telecommunications and IT engineer with the federal government. I have, or I guess I still do have it, the genetic version of PKD. I have the version that strikes you sort of in your mid, to late 50s. In my particular case, it hit me when I was roughly about 57 or so. And my creatinine levels were right at about 4.2, I think, at the time, where I realized that I needed to have a kidney transplant, and my GFR was below 20. Actually, was right at 20, and that thing does fluctuate a little bit depending, I guess, on some conditions. In my particular case, it was below 20 at the time when I finally had my transplant done. I've known about this my entire life. My cousins, aunts, mothers. My mother also had the condition. I originally discovered this actually when I was really, really young. In roughly, I guess it had to be about 10 years old or so, where I had an evaluation done, and they discovered high amounts of protein in my urine. And that's what led to additional testing being done. And sure enough, my mother told me, yeah, you have the condition. Did I believe it? No. I'll just grow out of it, right? No big deal. Well, that didn't happen. So I didn't understand genetics at the time, I guess. And I cannot stress enough really the importance of just staying healthy, as healthy as you can, and keeping your body mass index down. You'll find that some hospitals might not even accept you for a transplant if, one, you have some underlying health conditions, and or if your BMI is too high, right? And they do that for a number of reasons, for surgical reasons, healing reasons, things of that nature. In each hospital, what I discovered was they seem to test for different things. Some of these tests are not transferable, and I kind of understand that, for liability reasons. So if you're going to be registered at multiple hospitals, you really want to be just cognizant of the fact that you might have to go through lots of different types of testing. In my particular case, I had a bad PSA rating that led to some concerns, so I had to have some additional testing around that to kind of get approval. I'm not going to go into great detail about all the other things, but I have a lot of information that I'd be willing to share with everyone in this session if you have any questions or concerns.
Thank you, Daryl.
Yeah.
Barbara, can you introduce yourself?
Sure. Hi, I'm Barbara Hope, and my PKD resulted from the fact it's genetic, and my dad and his brother both had PKD. I found out in my early 20s, and that was through blood in my urine. The doctors, once they saw that, discovered it, did a scan of some sort, and said, yes, you have PKD. And at that point, I felt like the clock was ticking for me because I knew with my dad, he went into renal failure probably sometime in his 50s. I was in my 20s. So I knew I had this span where I would probably be okay. And then after that, I would have some issues. And at the time, dialysis was really the only option available for my dad. So that was very different from now. Transplants were rather rare. He was not a candidate for transplant at that time. So his only option was dialysis. And the interesting thing there was my mom was a registered nurse. So they ended up dialyzing him at home, which again was very unusual. But they set up everything. They took my bedroom, set it up as what we called the D room, the dialysis room, and she dialyzed him for many, many, many years, which was really amazing and pretty good. I mean, very, very good. But anyway, for myself, knowing in my 20s that I had PKD and knowing that probably, hopefully, I would at least go until my 50s until such time as I would have to really start worrying about it. I packed a lot of things into my life. It was just, I know I have this time span. I want to take advantage of it as much as I can. And we did all kinds of things, my husband and I. I gave birth to a lovely daughter. We were avid sailors. We did catamaran sailing, flying a hull. We did a lot of outdoor activities, and we just were busy all the time. We loved to travel, so we would travel, take our daughter with us, and just took advantages of as much of life as we could, figuring that at some point in my mind, I was like, I'm going to be done and on dialysis for the rest of my life when I turn 50 or so. So that's kind of where my mindset was. So I ended up going into renal failure in November of 2002 at the age of 51. So it was a while ago. I went on dialysis, and my doc encouraged me to pursue a transplant, which I never even thought would be something that I could do and that would be available to me. So that was new. The rest is kind of history. I guess we'll talk about it later as we go along. But I've now had my kidney for 22 years. I don't know that that's a record, probably not, but so far 22 years, and hopefully it'll still keep going for quite a while longer.
Great. Thank you, Barbara. And Deborah?
Good evening, everyone. So my name is Debbie Plunkett. I found out initially that I had polycystic kidney disease as a result of my dad being diagnosed when I was in my early 30s. And his doctor recommended that my sisters and I be tested. And so back then, that's what we did. We all got tested. And as it turns out, all four of us ended up with PKD. And so it kind of hung over me, truthfully, for years. But I had two children and lived a great life, worked full time, traveled the world. It was in my late 50s that my kidney function began to really decline. And around that time, I started tolvaptan. It had just been approved the year before or two in the US. Started tolvaptan. It held me for a couple of years, but eventually in my early 60s, my function began to decline, and I just really was not feeling well. My kidney function was had dropped under 20. It was at 19. But even more concerning, that my stomach began to grow pretty significantly. Long story short, it was determined that I had also polycystic liver disease, and my liver was sort of taking over my whole body. And the end result was that I had both a kidney and a liver transplant in 2023, and doing great. 27 pound liver, just for the record.
It's wild. Thank you, Debbie. Silky?
Hi, everyone. I apologize. I am Silky Niederhaus. I am a transplant surgeon at University of Maryland, so I get to work with Christina a lot. I do not have polycystic kidney disease. I have had 2 kidney transplants. The first one they thought was post-streptococcal glomerulonephritis, but truthfully, in the end, it turned out that I have IgA nephropathy, which is an autoimmune disease. So I've lived with a transplant for longer than I can remember, since age 11. I did dialysis for a little while and stubbornly became a transplant surgeon. So I now get to help manage patients who have kidney failure, including those with polycystic kidney disease. And so we've always, wherever I've trained, there have always been good programs for patients with polycystic kidney disease where we approach transplantation sometimes a little bit differently than for our regular patient population. So I'm here to share what needs to be shared. My story's out online already, so I don't want to belabor that because I think our focus today is going to be on helping those with polycystic kidney disease like yourselves.
Thank you, Silky.
And
I'm going
I'm
to.
driving home from the operating room. Sorry, so I will be on a better connection and visible for you all after a little while.
That's great. Yeah, because of that, I think we had some preset questions. I'm just going to change the order a little bit because I had you answering the first one, and we'll try to get you to a computer before you can do that. So, I'm going to ask this question, and I'm hoping to hear from Daryl and Barbara from this one. How long did you have to wait for your transplant?
Barbara, do you want me to go?
Sure.
Okay. So I have kind of I guess, a unique situation. I decided to register at 5 different hospitals, right? I call that being greedy, call it whatever you want. And there were some advantages and some disadvantages to doing that. The Some of the advantages were you got multiple options, right? When an organ, in my particular case, I didn't have a living donor. I had to go through the deceased donor route. So things were a little bit more challenging. And because of my blood type, being blood type O, there can be a little bit longer of a wait list for people to fall into that category because I can only receive an organ from another blood type O. Unlike A's and ABs and B's, if you will, where they can get an O as well as one from their particular blood type. So I felt that, registering in multiple hospitals would give me some advantage. And in the end, it looks like it kind of worked. I was on the list for roughly about 2 years at the hospital that had originally registered at. And then as I kind of got on the list for other hospitals, obviously it was a little less than 2 years, and then I found a hospital that was out of state that seemed to have a shorter waiting list. And after the process of getting registered at that hospital, I was on that list for about a month and a half before I started getting my first deceased donor calls. You do have, I think we're going to talk about your right to accept or decline some of the offers that you might receive. You do have the right to decline, and obviously the right to accept any offer that's kind of shared with you. In my particular case, I think I declined something like 10 to 15 different offers prior to getting one that I felt was best for me, right? Best for me. I guess we'll learn about KDPI numbers and things of that nature as we kind of have this conversation. But in my particular case, I told them that I only wanted offers that had a certain number. And sure enough, it seemed to pan out for me. In my particular case, it was a 26 for the KDPI that I received. And I got that roughly after receiving approval, I guess you could say about 6 months from the time that I was ultimately approved to be on the list for that particular hospital. So I declined quite a few on the list for 2 years in total. When I finally accepted, it was about 6 months after my initial offer from that particular hospital.
Thanks, Daryl. Barbara?
Okay, for me, I'm blood type B, and that's also, there's more of a weight on that. And at the time, they were saying it would be maybe 6 to 10 years before I would actually get a deceased donor kidney. That was a long, long time. So my husband decided to step up and wanted to see if he could donate for me. So we went through the entire process. It's long and involved, do no harm, which is a good thing. And he went pretty far along, but he got to the point where he had to wear a blood pressure monitor just to make sure his BP was okay. Well, he failed that test. And once that happened, he could no longer be a donor for me. So we were back to square one. And it was like we weren't sure what we were going to do at that point. We knew the wait would be long. So we, of course, got on the deceased donor list. But at the time, I had several friends and a sister-in-law who stepped up and said they would be interested in donating one of their kidneys to me. I didn't ask anyone. I didn't feel it wasn't in my makeup. I just didn't feel comfortable asking anyone. So it wasn't like, could you donate for me? They stepped up and said, we would like to donate. So two of the folks in a larger group actually passed enough through that either one of them could be donors. One was a friend who lived in about probably 45 minutes away from me, and the other was my sister-in-law who lived in South Carolina. So at that point, since either one of them could have gone forward to donate, they talked. I was out of the picture. It wasn't anything I wanted to be or should have been involved with, so I was not. And the two of them talked and decided that because my friend lived closer, logistically, it would be easier if she was the one who was the donor. So it was a good friend of mine who stepped up, and that led to my journey of getting a living donor kidney transplant.
That's great. Thanks, Barb. All right. Um, Another question.
Oh, I'm sorry, I have one more. You asked how
Yeah,
long it was. From the time I went into renal
yeah,
failure till I got the transplant was 8 months.
8 months.
Yeah.
Okay, great. Um, I was gonna ask John, who couldn't make the call today, and Silky, this question. So I don't know if maybe someone else wants to jump in.
Go for it.
But okay, good. All right, can you just talk about how you knew it was time to get your transplant based off of how you felt, labs, what people were telling you? Just how did you know?
Yeah, I mean, there's a few things that go into it. My first transplant, I was a child, I was 11. And I was already on dialysis. So I didn't get put on the list until I was already on dialysis. That was 1988. The world was a different place, right? Plus, this first transplant was in Germany. So the other truth about that was that children have extra priority points. The waiting time was short. I was on the list for about 3 months, and the surgeon called and said, we have a kidney for you, and it's a good kidney. And it happened to be the first day of the holidays. And I didn't want to miss school because I was an overachiever even back then. And then the beauty of it was that he called first thing in the morning, and there were ugly rumors going around that if you had eaten anything, you would be intubated while awake, which is not true. But it sounded perfect because I knew I was NPO. I hadn't eaten anything, and I was like, this is the kidney, right? It's a holiday, like break, vacation. I'm not going to miss anything. Perfect. The second time around was a different story. I had a child, and then in switching immunosuppression around after going through pregnancy after transplant, the switching of immunosuppression back to my pre-transplant version resulted in a rejection. And at first, then I was in renal failure. I didn't need dialysis quite yet, but my GFR over the years dropped, and it was, 20, 25, 30, not great. I wasn't feeling good already. I'd gone to working part-time just 1 day a week to keep my skills up. And then as my GFR kept slowly declining, we said, okay, it's time to do a transplant. I was on the list because I knew that you can get listed as soon as your GFR hits 19. The waiting time on the list will start accruing. And waiting time for kidney transplant is pretty much how we measure you're nearer the top of the list. You're never number one, rarely, But near the top of the list is often good enough to get a transplant. And so starting your waiting time early is a smart move. And I knew that at that point in time because I was, a surgeon and into transplant. So I said, all right, my GFR is down to 19. Let me go through the evaluation, work up, get listed, and do all those things. I was still feeling okay, but very tired, itchy, crampy in the legs. And I was like, I would take a good kidney if it became available on the deceased donor list, right? And the listing is not always wait time based. For example, if a perfect match donor shows up where their tissue typing is almost identical to your own, sometimes you as a patient get put near the top of the list, even if you have almost no wait time. And so I was like, all right, I'm young, I'm healthy, and if something like that were to happen, I'll take it. The only organ offers I got early were organs from older people that the kidneys were not super perfectly functional. And I declined a couple of those because I had not yet started a search for a living donor. So once the kidney doctor started saying, hey, your kidney's getting worse, your GFR is getting worse, we need to start thinking about doing dialysis. At that point in time, I then decided that, hey, I should probably just now look into finding a living donor. And finding a living donor takes time. And I had seen other families and patients, they came for their transplant evaluation and within 2 months were transplanted. And I was like, oh, this is no big deal. If you have family and you know people and you have some friends, you can find a donor in 2 months. I'm also blood group O. So I ran into the issue that all my friends, my family, everyone was not blood group O. And we had signed people up for an exchange of organs or a swap. And that takes time when all your donors are not blood group O and you yourself are blood group O because of supply and demand. So nothing was moving forward. And in the end, my husband tried to donate his kidney to me. He was found to have kidney cancer. So he had surgery to remove that. And I was like, well, we can't both be out sick. We have a kid at home. There's nobody else. So he took care of his thing and my kidney thankfully hung in. And then my first living donor was scheduled and fell through the day before because of an imaging finding that was previously unrecognized, which made my husband super mad. And my 5-year-old child or 6-year-old child basically then said, Mom, I just hope they're okay and they don't have cancer like Dad did. And I'm like, okay, now I know who the support person in the house is with maturity and empathy. In the end, we found another donor, 2 other donors that we had lined up, one here and one whom I knew in another state. So I was either going to be transplanted here or in another state sooner or later, but we were able to set it up. And so for me, it was really, I wanted to avoid dialysis the second time around. And since living donors from a quality perspective, from a longevity perspective, and from a saving wait time perspective do much better than deceased donors, and I was able to find a living donor, I went that route, and I would strongly recommend that if that's an option for any of you.
Thank you, Selkie. So I want to ask what the actual surgery and immediate post-recovery period was like. And I'm wondering if anyone on the panel would like to volunteer for that, provide that answer.
It's just the waiting game when you get to the hospital when they actually tell you to come in because they still have to go put their hands on the organ to see if it's actually going to work for you. So once they actually come in and say, yep, we're going to be doing this surgery, you get prepped, you go to surgery, you're out of it. You come, for me, because I had 2 surgeries with liver and kidney, but after the kidney, I was extubated that same day. I was able to talk, raspy, very raspy because of the throat, but I was able to have ice chips. I wasn't in any pain actually on the first day. Over the next couple of days, of course, pain began to come. And so it was about managing the pain and making sure that my organs were working. So lots of measuring of output, urine output, and all kinds of blood work multiple times a day, just to make sure everybody was working well together and functioning. And then all of a sudden it's time to go home. So it was, initially when you're in ICU, especially, you're awakened all day and night. And so you don't get to sleep a whole lot. but you really get good medicines. And then eventually you start getting, weaned off of those into something that's more sustainable for when you go home. And, great, I had a great team of surgeons and doctors and a great team of nurses. Communication was key for me to talk about how I felt and how I was feeling and for them to be responsive to it. And I had no issues with that. Overall, it was a great, if you could say a transplant was a great experience, it was a good experience. Considering for me, it certainly was.
Yeah, Deborah, no, you're right. It was a great experience because it saved your life, right? Just like it
That's
did.
right. That's
Yeah.
right. That's right. Exactly.
And Rachel, I'd like to add one other thing to that.
Please.
In my case, because my surgery was done out of state, I literally had to stay out of state for 2.5 months, so that I was in close proximity to the hotel, to the hospital. Because as Deborah pointed out, there's a lot of testing that's going on during that period, to ensure that, the organ is going to work out for you. Different types of, testing for minerals, magnesium, and in my particular case, I was really, really low in magnesium. My white blood cell count, my red blood cell count, all of those things, right? So if you do have something done out of state, keep that in mind that you may have to stay in very close proximity to that hospital for a little time there.
Yeah, that is a good point. Deb and Daryl, I'll probably ask you the next question. Did you experience any medication-related problems or any concerns post-surgery?
Yeah, that's a good question. I mentioned magnesium a moment ago. I don't know if that's normal for people going through, an organ transplant, but in my case, my numbers are really low. And the unfortunate thing that I had was that I was also experiencing a bout of diarrhea. And that's a nightmare, right? If you just had a transplant done and you're trying to get your levels at a consistent level and you're having diarrhea, right? You don't want to flush everything out of you. So we did a little dance there to try to figure that out. And unfortunately, magnesium does what, right? It increases your chances for having, excess fluid in your bowels. So we had to figure that out. Fortunately, we were able to get it figured out. And tacrolimus, believe it or not, which is one of the medications that you take to kind of suppress your immune system so that your body doesn't fight the organ, also depletes magnesium. But trust me, these doctors are wonderful. They will figure out whatever situation that you go through. As far as I'm concerned, you don't have anything to worry about. Whatever your situation is, they'll figure it out for you, right? And I mentioned the white blood cell count and which was a little bit too low in my particular case, and the red blood cell count because I was anemic going into this. But they figured all that out for me. So medication wise, took a lot of meds at the time. And to be honest, I still take, probably more than most, but it is what it is. I just have to learn to deal with it. And I am, one of the unfortunate things, I shouldn't say unfortunate, but I'm still taking steroids, prednisone. And there are some side effects to prednisone. One thing is it can also induce diabetes. And you don't want to catch diabetes because that can be detrimental to the organ. But they have other medications that can deal with that, right? So once again, a little dance there that you may have to go through, but they'll figure it out for you. So I wouldn't worry.
And if I can interject, Daryl, I also had issues with low magnesium, and I ended up being put on, and it was diarrhea was bad. But there's a medicine out there, it's over the counter called Slomag, SLO, and then MAG, and it's sort of a coated tablet, so it's more of a delayed release. So instead of getting that big hit, first thing when you take the pills, it spreads it out, over time as it's in your body. So if anybody has to, take magnesium, there are some solutions that help that today.
Yeah, thanks, Barbara.
Yeah, and I would say, specific medication related problems I didn't have. You have to have the patience to trust your team because the medications change all the time, particularly in the first 3 to 6 months until your body really settles down. I think I came home with something like 34 different medicines I was taking, and now I'm taking 3. And so lots of juggling of medicines that happen in the hospital and when you get home, because you're going in to see someone every week there for the first couple of months. and they run bloods and they look at the results and they juggle your medicines, and you just got to have a mechanism for keeping account of that. But I didn't specifically have any medication related issues.
Thank you. All right. Let's ask the question, what is the first year like after receiving a kidney? Deb, you just want to continue?
Sure, right. So it's exciting. So you're juggling a lot of things, not just the medications, but I lost a tremendous amount of weight, both from my large liver, but also because I was not well for probably 6 months before then. And so I had lost some weight. And so, they're regularly telling me to eat meat, eat meat, eat meat to try to both heal and also begin to build up strength. And so for me, I was up walking, even in the hospital, even in the ICU. I was walking around the ICU. I wanted to be up and moving. That's kind of really, really important. They love you to be moving, and moving. The faster you move, the quicker you get out. And not just your legs, but the other move too. Yeah, it's all good. All works together. And so spending a lot of time, moving, but also making sure you're eating the right things, that you're tracking all of the things that they want you to track, your blood pressure, your weight. If anything goes off, I had a situation about 3 or 4 weeks after being released to being at home where I had blood in my urine. So right back to the hospital we go. And I was fortunate. One of my surgeons was there in the hospital and he found out I was there. He came right down to the ER, took care of the problem, and I went home the same day. So you have to be especially very diligent, knowing your body, knowing what normal feels like, managing your pain, and making a decision about how much you want to manage that. And then, within a week of coming home, I was outside carefully holding my husband's arm, walking. And just, that walking is really, really important. After about, for me, it was, I went from going in every week to going in after about 2 months. I then went into the clinic every 2 weeks. And then finally I graduated, and they actually call it graduated. So I was able to graduate and then go in once a month. And I went on for once a month for that first year. And really, it gets easier and easier. It's just getting your blood work checked, talking about how you're feeling, making sure you're bringing all your questions to the clinic because they're really smart people there who've seen it all and they can answer them. Making sure if you are making sure you're protecting yourself from picking up anything that you don't want to pick up that would put you or your kidneys or your liver at risk. And then all of a sudden you're a year in, and by the way, somewhere around, I guess for me it was probably 6 or 8 months. Yes, you do gain weight. It does come back, and some of it is because of the medication. I was only on prednisone for a very short while, and then I was able to come off the steroid, but still the other medications cause you to all of a sudden gain weight. And so now then you get a different problem. So.
Thanks, Deb. Daryl, can you
Sure.
also kind of talk about your first year, how that went?
Yeah, sure. And Deborah, I'm glad that you reminded me about the appetite because I'm a big guy, right? I mean, I'm a cyclist, somewhat of an athlete, and I had no appetite after surgery. So that was kind of a shocker to me, and I gotta admit, it was a little scary for a while there. But once again, we're able to figure it out, right? Just gotta stay plugged in. And when I got my appetite back, came back a little slowly, but it finally worked out. Um, and I think it's really important to have a really, really good med program. What I mean by that is the medications that we were talking about earlier. You can't do this alone. Trust me, you're going to need someone there with you, working. And they tell you this, right? Make sure that you have, loved one, partner, whatever the case is, by your side, helping you through this process because there's a lot that you're going to have to do. I thought that I could figure out my medications, but my schedule was a little tricky. I had some that had to take in AM, some in the PM, some at noon, some daily, some Monday, Wednesday, and Friday, some only on Thursdays. And you really have to have someone helping you, especially if you're going to have an extreme regiment like I had to kind of figure things out. Everyone is different, right? Then the cleaning of the surgical areas, drain tubes and things of that nature. You can't do this on your own, right? Especially when you first get out of surgery. In my case, I have really strong legs, and it took a little while for my legs to come back. Um, I'm going to say about a month and a half or so, until I really felt normal to be able to walk around and without feeling the weight, if you will, of my legs. And as Deborah pointed out, move as much as you can after you have the surgery. And you do that for a number of reasons. You don't have to worry about blood clots and things of that nature too, but it's just naturally healthy, right, to be able to do that given the procedure that you just had. So nothing to worry about really. Lots going on, but these are professionals and they got you back. So nothing to worry about for the most part.
Thanks, y'all. Silky and Barbara, can you shed light on what it's like living after that first year?
Sure. You want me to go first? Is that okay?
Go ahead.
Okay.
Sure.
Well, I resumed life as normal for me. I'm very type A, always into all kinds of things. And I went right back to work after that, for probably after about 3 to 6 months, I actually started working again. So I worked full time, for many more years. Our daughter was 15 years old, I guess, when I went into renal failure. But we were able, once I got the transplant, we were able to do lots of things with her. We traveled. We did all kinds of things. My husband and I loved to travel. So even after she was out of the house, we did a lot of travel and pursued our passion that way. So we loved that. But I have to say that the thing that I really treasured the most were the milestones and things that happened with my family. We loved the travel and all that other. But when I think on it, every single milestone was precious to me. We went to our daughter's high school and college graduations. We celebrated when she got her master's degree. We danced at her wedding. We're now blessed with 2 little grandchildren. So life is really, really wonderful. This is over a long span, but all I can say is, we lived life to the fullest. We're enjoying every moment that we can. And life is good. There are some challenges, but I think they get worked out over time. You get more used to everything that you need to do to maintain good health and all the things that the others have said. So that's really it. I think when I went into renal failure, given my dad's experience only being able to have dialysis, I had always thought that was going to be it for me, that I would have to be on dialysis for the rest of my life. So getting the transplant just completely overjoyed me, and life was precious and every moment I treasured. So,
Barbara, what was the coolest place you've traveled to with your transplant?
oh gee, where did we go? We did a lot of travel in Europe, particularly in France. We did a lot of small group tours in France, so we were all over the country and spent a lot of time there and loved it. Absolutely loved it.
Yeah, no, we like to travel too. I mean, I think life after transplant can be very close to normal.
Mhm.
There's two sides to it, right? On the one hand, and I think Barbara articulated this really quite well, overjoyed is one way to feel after transplant. And my first transplant, 1000%. We didn't have the expectation that that kidney would last long. It was the 1980s. The outcomes were not that great. We thought 7 years would be a miracle. That kidney made it 30. So, it just goes to show you that even sometimes we doctors don't know all too much, right? Because stuff happens and we're like, I have no reason why it should go that long or not should go that long. In any case, I had 3 rejection episodes with the first kidney, and they were like 50-50, it'll last a year. And then after 7 years, it was still going. And eventually I just quit worrying because I'm like, worrying about how long this is going to last, there's no telling. And it was 30 some years in the end. I did everything pretty normally, growing up. I did what all the other kids did. I didn't limit or restrict myself. I stayed away from grapefruit juice because that interacts with tacrolimus, and apparently so does pomegranate juice. But that's not a huge sacrifice because most people don't have that as part of their daily routine. We've traveled, even with my second kidney transplant now, I would caution people in the first year after transplant, your immune system can be still rather weak, and it's not probably the time to do big trips. Sure, you can go if there's a wedding in the country in another state, you can go there and make that. But big international travel comes with different risks because of different infections and prevalences of things, right? So we actually went to Africa and to Kenya, but like carefully after talking with an infectious disease specialist and having all the right vaccines and knowing what to avoid and what to wear and how to prevent mosquito-borne illness and how to prevent, this illness and that illness and what to do if this happens and that happens, right? Ultimately, I went to Africa. I think I had an entire pharmacy with me for all possible things that could happen, except I realized I forgot to pack Tamiflu in case I got flu. I ended up with pneumonia. Of all the things, I ended up with a run-of-the-mill pneumonia in Africa, right? Like the minute I landed the next day, I had a high fever, and I'm like, "What? Good thing here. Which of these pills do I choose?" Right? And my team on speed dial, and they were like, "Yep, that one will do." And within a day, I felt back to normal. So it's because recognizing early when you don't feel right and knowing what to do about it can really, really be helpful. I've done everything, right? I mean, I was the crazy person who was, as a kid, then discouraged to become a doctor because the lifestyle is crazy. You work nights, you work weekends, you're going to forget your meds. And I'm like, no, I just became a squirrel. And I have little stashes of medication here, there, and everywhere. And the pharmacists think I'm nightmarish. But I have a little thing in my purse with all the pills I need. I know what they look like. I take 5 pills in the morning and 6 pills at night and one once a week. At this point in time, they're not all transplant meds. Some of them I call shenanigans, like my multivitamin. I probably will survive just fine if I don't take my multivitamin every day. I could take it every other day, right? So, same with sodium bicarb. Yes, it helps your kidneys live longer, but like there are certain days when I'm like, oops, I'm out of bicarb. Nothing bad happens from missing a dose of bicarb, right? But then tacrolimus, myfortic, my transplant meds, they must not be missed, right? So they definitely go in the system. My cholesterol pill definitely goes in the system. There's no ifs, ands, or buts about that. So I have a little stash at work. I have a little stash in my purse, and I always did since residency, because then if I got stuck working late or if I had to do an overnight, I never had to worry about, am I going to get my meds? So that's been sort of my safety blanket, is that I always have my meds on me. When we travel, we don't put our meds in carry-on. It goes with us, carry-on. It doesn't go underneath. Like I'm not separated from my pills, not for a minute. So, and I do my blood work faithfully, right? I've learned to save my veins and have them draw blood from my hand in case I ever do need a fistula or dialysis access, because unfortunately, kidneys don't last forever. The longest that I'm aware of is in its 50s and is still working after 50 some years. So
Wow.
that was not mine. I was pretty good with 30 on my first one. My newest one is on 6 years. Generally, if the kidney works well after 1 year of transplant, it has a high chance of keeping going well for a long time, barring any stupid infections, viruses, whatever things that may happen. But it depends, your life after transplant depends a lot on what quality of kidney you get. And I think you heard Daryl saying earlier, I was not eager to get any old kidney. I wanted a good one. And it depends on what you need out of life, right? If I'm 70 and I'm approaching dialysis again, and I've had 2 transplants already, finding a match may not be that easy, right? And at 70, I don't have a goal of necessarily living 20, 30 more years. I don't need to have a near perfect kidney. If my goal at 70 is I want to spend the last 3, 4 years here off dialysis, then I'm willing to take a high KDPI kidney that has an average lifespan of about 5 years, right? There's a time and a place, I think, for everything in life, right? But at age 42, 43, when I had my second transplant, I was like, no, I have a 6-year-old. I need to be there for, graduation and college graduation and wedding, hopefully someday, and grandkids and whatnot. And I'm like, right now, I still am in need of a really high quality kidney. And that's why I really aggressively pursued the living donor option, because they average 15 years. The high KDPI kidney average is 5 years, and the kidneys from the list average 5 to 10 years. Now, the beauty is, for all of you who have polycystic disease, you're a little bit in my boat with IgA, even better. Polycystic disease doesn't recur after transplant. It's not a disease that comes back in the new kidney, right? Because it's genetic. And so unlike a lot of other transplant patients who've had diabetes and high blood pressure, and they will still have diabetes and high blood pressure after transplant that will harm their kidney and limit how long that new kidney works, people with polycystic kidney disease usually have above average outcomes with kidney transplant. So that's something I think quite worth mentioning, that the quality of life depends on the quality of the kidney. Because if you get a kidney and the creatinine from the new kidney is 2.5 or 3, you're not going to feel the same as if your creatinine is really down to 1 or 0.9.
Thank you so much. We kind of covered some of the questions that we have on here. I want to maybe get Christina involved and you touched on this a little bit, Silky, but if Christina could come in and talk a little bit about the difference between the living donor and deceased donor regarding outcomes.
So for outcomes regarding living donor and deceased donor, so we really tried to promote living donor at University of Maryland. Sometimes for the living donors, you can get transplanted prior to actually starting dialysis. That would be our hope. The process also, our wait times are significantly long, and that's just not at Maryland, that's across the board. So sometimes based on your blood type, you could wait 5 or 6 years for a transplant. If you get a living donor, sometimes if you're motivated, the donor's motivated, we can try to get that surgery done within 3 to 6 months. The longevity of a living donor transplant is a lot lengthier, or it can be a lot lengthier than a deceased donor. I mean, you could get a great deceased donor that could last you. I had a guy today who I think his transplant lasted him about 17 years, and it was a deceased donor. But he's kind of rare. I feel like living donors really go that long for the most part. What else? I'm trying to think. They're better quality kidneys, so they usually will start making urine immediately. There's not much downtime after that. You're usually not back on dialysis with a living donor. So I think those are probably the biggest perks to getting a living donor.
Thanks, Christina. And I will say, if anybody on this call as an attendee has interest in living donation and maybe wants to help find a living donor or just want resources or things they can share for friends and family interested, we did a panel like this one last year over living donors, and that you can either I think everybody has my email address. You can ask for that link, and I could share it with you if you're interested and you didn't see it the first time.
And there's also
So,
videos online.
yes.
We have to learn how to find a living donor. Our National Kidney Foundation has amazing resources for that as well. So we want to help you do that because it's not an easy conversation to have.
Yes, that is true. If someone comes forward, like in Barbara's case, that's one positive, but not everybody is able or feeling like they can ask friends and family. It's a hard ask. So we recognize that, just saying, well, make sure you have a living donor, it's not as easy as it's just saying that. So there are resources out there through various organizations, and I'm here to help. If you don't know where to turn, I can help put you in the right direction. Are there any financial burdens related to transplant, Christina, that you could that you know of?
Financial burdens, for the most part, as long as you have adequate insurance and you maintain that insurance throughout your entire transplant experience, then we really make sure prior to transplant that your insurance is going to cover your medications post-transplant. Sometimes patients do have a minimal copay for their immunosuppression medications because they can be quite pricey. So if you maintain your insurance, you should, for the most part, be covered post-transplant. If you let your insurance lapse, you most likely aren't going to be able to afford your transplant medications because they are significantly very pricey. And so that's why it's important to always have your insurance. I would think that is probably what we see the most when it comes to patients and their transplants failing is they weren't able to afford their medications because they let their insurance lapse.
And for some patients, it's not just one insurance, right? Some people have one insurance for healthcare in hospital and then one for medication insurance, and it's important to have both. For me, there was an additional barrier depending on what your health insurance coverage is. Some of them cover transplant, but not all of them cover donor complications. So they will pay your insurance as the recipient pays for the donor operation and the donor workup. The donor does never pay for a penny of their health care related to transplant. But because of that, I had to pay for Medicare insurance to pay for if anything were to go wrong with a donor after surgery. And that was for 3 years after transplant. I had to make a payment monthly to Medicare to have that additional coverage. And that was a significant out-of-pocket cost. And then there was one other test that was sort of a high-end fancy test that my insurance wouldn't cover to test for rejection in the blood work. That I had to pay out of pocket, and that was $900 one time. So every now and then you can get hit with kind of something that you just didn't know your insurance covered. So hopefully, with good insurance, none of these things are issues. If you're older, when, transplant strikes and you're on Medicare, that's generally very good coverage. But if you're not yet on Medicare and you're younger, then sometimes the other insurance companies don't have equivalent coverage for all the details.
Hey, so I'm glad you mentioned that. I do have, primary coverage through the government. I have Blue Cross and Blue Shield, which covered most of the needs that I had. And I did not obviously go with a living donor. But I also, believe it or not, signed up for the Medicare for the 3 month, not 3 month, 3 years of Medicare coverage because I had the renal failure. And you're right, it's very expensive. You would think if I had a living donor, then it would be more appropriate to do that. But I didn't have a living donor, because just thinking about other alternatives for me. And I also had to have a few Prospera tests, which, kind of go through, as you know, the process of sort of identifying whether or not, or how well the grafting is occurring, if you will, for the received organ. And my primary insurance didn't pay for that, but Medicare covered it 2 times that it was done. So, yeah, is it worth it? Yeah, I don't know. Well, maybe not, but it was good to see that Medicare had covered those extra expenses for me.
I was going to do all the questions at the end, but somebody in the chat had asked how insurance was handled when transplanted in another state. And I think that was a question for you, Daryl. Is there any insight to that?
I had no issues at all. Although I live in Virginia, and my procedure was done out of state, as long as it was done at I forget what they call it, but at a licensed, I'll just call it a
The
licensed
Center of
institution.
Excellence.
Yeah, Center of Excellence. There it is. Thank you, Silky. Then there's no issue, right? And before I got registered at the 5 different hospitals that I was at, I made sure that my insurance would cover any procedures that I had done. So it was no problem at all for me.
Yeah, that's the clutch point. You have to check with your insurance what your insurance allows, because there are so many different insurance carriers. And frankly, it's, to me as a surgeon who's done a lot of education, insurance is mysterious and nightmarish. And if I don't understand it, I feel sorry for every patient. Because if I, as a doctor, can't tell you what it's all about and what it does, then it's a problem, right? So yeah, find someone, and there's usually on the transplant team a financial counselor, financial person who can kind of help you, but sometimes it's really smart to contact your insurance, and some insurance will actually have navigators on their end to help patients go through transplant, because they know what their centers of excellence are and what their advice is. So it's not a bad idea to reach out to your own insurance group.
That's a good point. And are there any resources out there for transplant recipients that you think everyone should know about? And this question could go to Barbara, you can go to anyone, but calling Barbara out.
Yes. There's always obviously the PKD Foundation, National Kidney Foundation, the UNOS, the United Network of Organ Sharing, and then the Organ Procurement and Transplantation Network, OPTN. And there may be other different groups. It's interesting that I somehow patched into this group of their vaccine study, a vaccine study group. And these people are they're regular mortals like you and I, most of them. But they go into such detail in terms of every single strain of like COVID that there is and the different vaccines that are out there. But I find that quite interesting. And they also have lots of practical information as well. There was a question the other day about people asking how many people, now that COVID's out there, how many take more precautions? What kind of precautions do you take? So kind of sharing with any of those kinds of sites are good if you have them, or if there are any mentor programs. I don't know if Maryland does that, or, that's helpful as well, so that you can talk with somebody who's been through, all of this and what resources they use. So I don't use that much anymore because I'm so far out that I'm not really doing that much research, other than trying to figure out how to maintain, and keep myself healthy through a COVID environment.
Yeah.
I would also, oh, go ahead.
No, go ahead.
Yeah, I was going to say I would obviously recommend the University of Maryland based on my experiences, but there's also a really, really nice website out there. I'm looking at it now. It's called srtr.org. It's the Scientific Registry of Transplant Recipients, and it gives you a ton of information about institutions that actually do organ transplants, kidney, liver, whatever the case might be, what their numbers are, success rates, failure rates, all these things. I would highly recommend it, srtr.org.
Yep. There are obviously other resources, super straightforward, right? You're a transplant coordinator, your own transplant team. I've been involved here in Maryland with Transplant Recipients International Organization, which is TRIO. And they do actual mentoring. They have a lot of people that are, have had all sorts of organ transplant, heart, lungs, livers, kidneys. They do send a group to the transplant games, which is fun for anyone playing sports and wanting to stay active with other transplant patients. So there's definitely a lot of different options out there.
Great, thank you. Well, we had a couple other questions, but I think they were all covered in some fashion by the different answers received. So I'd like to open it up to our attendees, and you can either throw the question in the chat, or I think if you can raise your hand, I can allow you to speak with the microphone. So any questions, and you can call out a specific person on the panel, or you can just do a general question, and whoever feels like they want to answer can answer. All right, this is from Amy.
I wondered if anybody had their PKD kidneys removed after or during the surgery of the transplant.
Hi, Amy. I guess I'll give my first response. My kidneys, my original kidneys, are still in my body. Um, I guess, you know, if they ever, Silky could probably talk a little bit more in detail about it, but if they ever became a problem for me through infections and things of that nature, then they would consider taking it out. However, I can tell you that removal of your original kidneys is considered a major surgery, even more major, if you will, than the addition of a third kidney, which is what I have right now for the transplant. So my doctors, now the original kidneys, I haven't done an ultrasound lately to see if they're still growing in any way, shape, or form. You will find, at least for PKD patients, because the kidneys do increase in size, that they cause all kinds of other problems of moving things around. And many people have umbilical hernia issues as a result of it, which I have right now, which I have yet to get fixed. Unfortunately, if I had a living donor, I could have actually had received my umbilical hernia repair at the time that I had my third kidney installed. But because I went the deceased route, none of that could be planned, right? So they couldn't plan to have both procedures done at the same time. So now I run the risk, if you will, of having the umbilical hernia repaired at a time when I'm also immunocompromised. So I just have to take that into consideration. But overall, yeah, I still have my kidneys. At this point, do they need to be taken out? No. No one is telling me that. I don't know if that's going to happen in the future or not, but at this point, no.
So I actually had one of my kidneys removed concurrent with my kidney transplant. because of the size of my liver had pushed this kidney far down into my pelvis and twisted it. And so I was concerned about it staying. And so no promises made by the surgeon. I asked, and as it turned out, they decided to take it out. And so I don't know what it would have been like without it. But I had a great recovery.
All right.
Yeah. In general, I think we take kidneys out when there's an indication or a reason to take it out, right? Like surgery is always surgery. We can do a kidney transplant through a diagonal incision that kind of goes from, your lower midline to a little bit up and out to the side. And that's an easy incision to put a new kidney in that stays away from where your bowels are generally. And then we just connect however many blood vessels, usually one in, one out, and then one ureter to the bladder, and that new kidney can work. So if the old kidneys are too big and there wouldn't be room to connect the new kidney and find space in the abdomen, that would be a reason to take one or two of the kidneys out. If there's recurrent infections that are harbored in the kidneys or in the cysts, that's a reason to take one out. If people have rupturing cysts that cause severe pain and dependence on pain medication and things like that, that's a good reason to take kidneys out. And if the kidneys get so large that, patients are losing weight because they can only eat one bite of food before they feel full from these very large polycystic kidneys, that's also a good reason to take the polycystic kidneys out, right? And there's a few different ways of dealing with when kidneys should come out. Generally, my thought about it is that if we can leave the kidneys in, while people are on dialysis, that's usually a good thing because those kidneys that are polycystic, while they might not clean the blood properly, they still can make urine. And even if the urine is what I call stupid urine, because it's not properly cleaning your blood, it's still volume. And that makes dialysis, especially hemodialysis, much less torture, in the sense that you're not fluid restricted to just drinking one little bottle of water a day, right? Or soup or watermelon. And so you're much more free to follow your normal dietary patterns if you still have a kidney that makes urine, even if it's not good urine. So I generally am in favor of leaving them in. And Maryland, we will take the kidneys out at the time of transplant if we have a living donor. We now have started actually doing this robotically, where we can take the kidneys out if they're not too big with a robot with a smaller incision, because we do a lot of mobilizing with the robot, and we've even started doing occasionally some transplants robotically, again, through smaller incisions. Traditionally, taking the kidneys out while doing a transplant is a big midline incision from literally stem to stern, right? I mean, the bone that you feel under your rib cage all the way down to your pubic bone is as big of an incision as we normally need to make, and it risks being near bowel obstruction, bowel adhesions. Your bowel's slower to wake up after surgery. You may have to have a tube in your stomach to suck that out. And then all the things that are near those big kidneys, the liver, the gallbladder, the adrenal glands, right? A lot of people get a little low blood pressure after removing both kidneys because we've played with the adrenal glands to sort of separate them out. The pancreas is near there, the spleen is near there. All these things can get injured, and then the blood vessels to those kidneys come off the biggest blood vessels in your body, the aorta and cava. And if they're not properly sealed off, people can bleed, and they can bleed a lot and bleed quickly after that kind of surgery. So it's not risk-free to just take kidneys out, right? We now do it for like kidney donors, right? We just take it out with a robot or a laparoscope, and it's become a much smaller operation on the outside, but on the inside, you're still near major structures every time you go there, and you have to respect that, right? So in my mind, if there's a good reason to take the kidney out, we should take it out, and if there's no reason to take it out that's obvious, and we think the patient will be fine leaving them in, then we would leave them in because, we don't operate just for fun.
Thank you, Sophie. I've got a question in the chat, and then we'll head up. We have another hand up. So the question in the chat, maybe Christina can answer. She says, "How early can my sister get tested to see if she would be a good living donor? I'm about 5 years out from needing a transplant."
Your sister can get tested at any point. She can apply for on our online link to see if she would be for candidacy, to see if she would be a good potential living donor. So at any point, you can have a living donor apply. Are you actually listed on our list, or are these patients just like looking for answers?
Well, so this particular question is coming from someone who is about 5 years away from needing a transplant.
Right. But what I'm saying is, so if you're
Oh.
already like in the process of getting a transplant with us and we work up your donor as well, then you guys can get worked up together. And then if you're a match, then we can go ahead and move forward and get you listed and then transplant it with your donor. If you're not listed with us, your donor can still apply, but we would have to have you start your evaluation with us as well, so we can move the process along if your donor is a match and would be a good candidate for you. So yes, they could apply, but if you haven't started the process with a center, it would be in your best interest to do so. That way you can start along with the donor if the donor qualifies.
The other thing is, you know, we want to have certain tests closer to the surgery of donation.
Mhm.
So, you know, a CAT scan may need to be repeated. If you apply to be a donor and then you don't proceed with transplant for another 5 years, you may need to have another CAT scan. You may need to have another cardiac test, another colonoscopy, another mammogram. So it's good whenever you come, whether it's as a recipient or as a donor, to have all your normal health maintenance all checked out and taken care of, right? Because then the transplant workup goes a lot more expeditiously if we don't have to hunt down why your PSA is high, if you've already had your primary manage that and, you know, check with your urologist. And if you've already had your colonoscopy and now you aren't found to have some kind of thing that needs follow-up. So the more you can come, you know, all ready, set, go, the quicker workup will go.
Thanks, okay. Question from B. I'm going to unmute or allow you to unmute.
Hi, I just had a really quick question.
Yeah.
I did have, this is for Silky, I did have both my kidneys removed during a living donor transplant. It was not made clear to me like just how big of a risk it was for small bowel obstruction, and I actually did end up having one. It did end up resolving on its own, so I didn't need an NG tube. But is there anything I should be doing to attempt to ensure that I don't continue to be at risk for a bowel obstruction? Like, I'm assuming it's scar tissue because it's such a major surgery, but like they didn't have to go in really. It just like nature kind of took its course. And so, but I'm just wondering if I'm at risk for that to happen in the future, given that like nothing, like I'm not passing the scar tissue or anything. So I just wanted to know if Silky had any thoughts
Yeah,
about that.
sure. No, bowel obstructions are bowel obstructions. And in America, in our lovely country, the most common reason for a bowel obstruction is prior surgery, and that becomes an adhesive bowel obstruction, right? In the rest of the world, the most common cause of bowel obstruction are hernias. So both of those are the most common things for bowel obstruction, if you will. So anytime you have intra-abdominal surgery, there's a risk. Even if you have a kidney transplant without removing your kidneys, there's still a small risk of bowel obstruction because we have to still close the muscle layers. And sometimes those stitches go through the peritoneum. Sometimes the peritoneum tears and we have to close it and put stitches there anyway. So it doesn't mean that if you only had a kidney transplant, you certainly wouldn't have had a bowel obstruction. As far as I know, there's nothing you can do to prevent it. It either happens or it doesn't, right? It's yeah, it's like BK virus. Either you get it or you don't. So, you know, we all wish we could prevent things better. I wish I had a crystal ball that would tell me, does this kidney work in this patient or will it fail? And I would never do that transplant because that's my major bane of existence. But unfortunately, there's just still a lot of things we don't know and we don't have control over.
Thanks, Sophie. All right, we have a chat question that might be good for Daryl. They ask, how do you get listed with multiple hospitals? With listed in quotations, so
Yeah.
it's
Yeah, it's the same process over and over and over again, right? You know, it's in my case, I wanted to go to hospitals that were sort of geographically dispersed, right? You know, so I had one hospital that's in actually two, well, one in DC, I had one in Virginia, I had one in Maryland, I had one in Michigan, and I had one in Ohio. And it's, you know, some of the information, as Silky pointed out earlier too, can be shared. so not information. What I mean information is the test that you do to get on the list, if you will, can be shared from one hospital to the next. However, some other things that hospitals might require that are very unique, so you have to have additional tests that are done. So in that case, you also want to ensure that your insurance is going to cover that, right? And things can be a little difficult once you get on these lists, because you also have to have these monthly PRA blood work workups that are done that you have to send to each hospital. So in my case, since I was on the list at 5 hospitals, I had to do that every month for all 5 hospitals. One particular hospital, however, only wanted that blood work done, I think, once a quarter, if I'm not mistaken. And the other problem, quote unquote, is once I got my transplant, um, 3 of the other 4 hospitals started billing me for all of those PRA tests that I actually had done. I checked with my insurance carrier and they said, yeah, a particular portion of that, is your responsibility. So that's another risk that you run by getting listed, if you will, at multiple hospitals is that, I mean, it wasn't an extreme amount, but it was a few $1,000s that I kind of had to pony up for as a result of being listed at hospitals that ultimately did not transplant me. Yeah. So same process. Some hospitals make it real difficult because you have a lot of other things to do. Uh, 2 hospitals did not make it so difficult, and they took a lot of the information that I already had done, or the testing that I already had done from some of the other hospitals. So yeah, combination there. Hopefully that helps.
Yeah, thanks, Daryl. All right, we have another question. I'm listed and active, and I have a living donor who has just been officially approved to donate. How long does it typically take to get from this point to getting the transplant?
That's just up to 1, is the OR available? 2, is there a donor surgeon or recipient surgeon available? And 3, is the recipient free and is the donor free, right? Some donors are teachers and they're like, I don't want to do this during the school year. I want to do it over the holiday. I want to do it here. I want to do it there. And then, even in the big hospital where we work right now, we only have a donor room and a recipient room in which to do our operations on Mondays and Thursdays, right? So if someone says, I want surgery on Wednesday, that's really difficult for us to arrange because that's not how the hospital plans and books and schedules, and it requires a lot more switching. So in general, if your donor's approved and all your testing is up to date, then transplant can move forward as soon as you and your donor agree that you're free. And if you're both open to whatever dates the hospital gives, could be within a month.
Thank you. Do we have any other questions, either in the chat or raising your hand?
I am so very sorry. As I was asking my question, my nurse came in, so I didn't actually get to hear the rest of Silky's answer about SBO. Would you mind repeating that? I am so very sorry.
No problem. Bowel obstructions, like I said, are caused by either adhesions, that's the most common cause in America, and otherwise hernias, that's the most common cause worldwide, right? Those are the 2, and then the third one is cancer, specifically generally colon cancer, which is more of a large bowel obstruction. So those are the 3 reasons. There's nothing to do to prevent them. They either happen or they don't happen. Thankfully, most people don't have them. Thankfully, many of them kind of resolve and pass on their own, and scar tissue over time softens. So some people get really early bowel obstructions that, then resolve. Some people get it so significantly that only an operation fixes it. But they can be, when you get them, they can be either a one-time thing and no big deal, or they can be recurrent and somewhat miserable. Thankfully, that's the vast minority, and thankfully, most people don't struggle with bowel obstructions even after bilateral nephrectomy and kidney transplant for the rest of their life. So, but that's again, why I said we don't take kidneys out just for fun. We take them out when there's a reason to take them out. And so they more than likely than not had some kind of reason. And if the only reason is there's not space to fit the kidney.
Thank you so much. Yeah, they were kind of big. And so it was my understanding based on their review is that if it didn't come out at the time of the transplant, they would need to come out sometime after. And so they kind of left the choice up to me as to whether I wanted to do it all at once or split it up. And I just kind of wanted to get it all over with.
Yeah, that's a good choice because having more than one surgery is every time you have another anesthesia, which is not zero risk either.
Exactly. Thank you so very much.
All right. I don't see any more questions. They can still pop up, but I wanted to give our panelists, any of them, a chance to say any other words of wisdom, just elaborate on either a point or bring up a point we didn't discuss. I just want to give everyone an opportunity to say everything they'd like to.
I'll go first because my alarm just went off that I have to take medicine. And it reminded me that there are great tools available to help you stay on top of tracking your medicine. I used two of them because I missed one dose early on and it totally took me over the top. So now I have two alarms, two tools with two alarms, one that goes off 15 minutes later. But they're great tools that will keep track of everything, and the transplant team loves it because you can show them your schedule and how you've done with taking your medicines. So I let technology work for you.
Thanks, Deb.
In addition to what Deborah mentioned, I also have individual packets, if you will, that are labeled Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, yada yada yada, Monday AM, Monday PM, things of that nature, and it helps tremendously. And I also have all of my medications listed in a online, if you will. In my particular case, is Google Docs, where I can have access to this at any time. If I happen to be at an airport and I have all these pills in some plastic bag and I don't have the original medications with me, well, that can be a problem, right? So, but as long as you can point out what medications are what, typically they're not going to bother you too much. So just having it online really it can be helpful.
And the med programs are helpful too when you go to visit the doctor. Usually they say, what meds are you on? Well, then you can pull out your little list or your application and you can read them all off. It's also very helpful in knowing how many pills you have left. A lot of these decrement, you put in the original amount. It decrements every time you take the pill in one of the apps. And so you know exactly how many pills you have left, which makes it helpful when you need to go to reorder and do refills. So there's a lot of good tools out there.
Yeah. I'm glad you mentioned that too, Barbara, because it reminded me that some of the medications that we take, like the tacrolimus, for example, are specialty meds that you can't get at your local pharmacy. You have to typically get these online, right? I'll say CVS specialty. In my particular case, I use Amber Pharmacy, and they've been wonderful about getting me my meds on time.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think those are all great points. Don't run out of your meds. You got to have a system for knowing when to call for a refill, or else you got to have a close links to like a hospital pharmacy, right? If you live in the city, then you can always run downtown. They will not run out of those meds because the hospital will have more. The other thing is kidney disease is a big thing, right? It's with us for life. We don't shake it, right? It's truly a chronic disease. But don't forget the rest of you, right? Taking care of kidney disease means also taking care of the whole of you, right? Most people who have kidney disease have some amount of anxiety and or depression. That's normal, okay? Because our life is not normal. So it's different, right? We're special people, special life, right? Our biggest risk of death and dying after transplant is from heart disease, right? So controlling things like blood pressure, diabetes, cholesterol, avoiding smoking, being physically active. It helps both with recovery after surgery as well as with, preventing cardiac problems down the long run. Doing all your normal cancer prophylaxis, immunosuppression increases risks for cancers. All your preventative things are things that we should all be doing, right? That's just good general health advice, right? Seeing your primary every year, following up on what else do I need to do, what vaccines are good, what are not, basic good health care. And I think for some of us, that's really hard to get and hard to find because even the primary docs are busy. Our transplant docs are pretty good at it. The nephrologists, usually have an eye on bone disease and this problem and that problem that are all special things to pay attention to. But I think you become almost a little mini medical expert in following your own transplant care because it touches so many other parts of your body that, don't ever just focus about kidney only because your kidney won't work if your brain doesn't work. Your kidney working doesn't help if your heart doesn't work. They all play together, right? And we want to keep all the parts of us healthy. And the only person who can truly do that is you as the patient. Like I, as a doctor, can give advice, but I can't take your pills for you. I can't control your weight for you. I can say this is an option, this is an option, this is an option. In the end, you have to do the work. Like I cannot do it for you. I wish I could. I'd want to for many of my patients, but in the end, you're the only one who determines your success or failure most of the time.
And I'd like to add too that, we still live in this COVID world. Many of you have probably had COVID. I have not yet, unbelievably. But I think each person has to kind of decide, how often they're going to mask, whether they're going to be in a crowded room, whether they're going to be outside, if it's indoors and it's wintertime. So there are a lot of decisions that as an immunocompromised person, you need to think about, but each one of you is going to make that decision on your own. It's not something somebody can say it must be X, Y, and Z. You will decide what you're comfortable with, and that's just the way it is.
Yep. And it's like jumping out of an airplane, same. I compare it, some people will want to go on an airplane and jump out of it with a backpack on because they think that's great. And others will be like, I don't want to get on an airplane, it might crash, right? Like, don't even let me fly anywhere. And so we are like that as people, right? Donors who want to be living donors are like that too. So you'll ask one person, they're like, I don't want to donate, they could hurt me. And the other person may be like, really? You want my right kidney? I can give you my left one too, right? So that's just how people are. Don't be upset or offended. Just recognize we come as a variety. And even after transplant, I have friends who wear a mask everywhere. I don't, because I didn't with my first transplant. And it was never a problem, right? But like if I have certain things or symptoms or I go into an area, I'm like, oh, yeah, maybe I do want to wear a mask right here, right now, right? Like if I see a patient who may have tuberculosis, I will wear a mask as a doctor. But like if I go to the mall or the movies or a ball game, I'm normal. So that works for me. But you're exactly right, Barbara. Each of us has to find our own comfort level, and that's what matters more than my advice.
It's Silky, true story. I asked a cousin, about being a living donor, and the response back was, "When am I going to get it back?" Yeah, you're not getting it back.
I mean, my stories, my brothers were the last in the family to get tested and the last among my even friends to get tested. They were afraid to faint during the blood draw, right? Chickens. Granted, they were the wrong blood group and weren't of much use anyway, but you can't be mad at your family for making the decision that's right for them, even if it sort of feels a little bit hurtful to you. Just let it go. Like they're fine, they're cool, they're family, they'll have some other use.
Mhm. Those were some wise words.
Just one
Any-
other quick
Yeah.
comment. Maybe two. Well, so, my transplant coordinators were phenomenal, and I just can't say enough about the importance of that relationship and relying on them. They are a wealth of knowledge. They are able to get to they've been able to get to my doctors quickly and get me the information I needed when I needed it. And I had them on speed dial, and it was just really and remains a good relationship. And then the second is I'll just shout out to University of Maryland mail pharmacy delivery. They keep track of my medicine like nobody's business. They call me and say, we think you're getting low even before I'm there. And so that has been a really, really wonderful experience for me. They deliver it to my house 3 months at a time. It works out great.
Thanks, Deb. All right. If there's no other questions or thoughts from the panel, then we will wrap up the session. Thank you all
Thank you.
so much for participating. It's been really insightful. And I hope for those live and then anyone watching later can feel like this is not, it might feel isolating to have to go through a transplant, but know you're not alone and know there's resources out there and there's other people to reach out to. And so thank you so much for joining us, everybody. I hope you have a good rest of your night. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.